The war in Ukraine has changed the world. And now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project Reinforce UA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on reinforceua.com.
Good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are, dear colleagues and friends in Ukraine and worldwide. I'm Vyacheslav Pokotil, and on behalf of MIM Kyiv Business School, welcome you on Reinforce UA's project. This project was designed to inspire Ukrainian business community and to bring prominent speakers with their ideas, which are currently widely discussed worldwide. And despite we have at the moment not an easy time in Ukraine with continuing war, we need to think about the future, and this project is future-oriented. And today's subject in particular will be very much linked to this idea. This project became possible due to the generous support of Bogdan Havrilishin Family Foundation's 50 Thinkers organization, three major business education associations, FMD, AACSB, and AMBA. We are very grateful for donations you made when registering on this site, and remind you that all money collected will be directed to support temporarily displaced Ukrainian women who would like to start their own businesses. Before I will introduce you to today's guest, I'd like to remind you that the speakers and the session is recorded, and the video will be available afterward on the site and on YouTube. And but at the end, we shall be able to answer some questions, which you can ask by pushing a Q&A button. Please do not use chat for this purpose. We may not be able to follow chat, but obviously we'll try to address all questions in Q&A. And now I have a honor to introduce you Professor Roger Martin. Professor Martin is Professor Emeritus at the Roman School of Management and University of Toronto, where he served as a dean for 15 years, from 1998 till 2013. He is academic director. He was academic director of Michael Lee Chin Family Institute for Corporate Citizenship and until 2019, and Institute Director of the Martin Prosperity Institute from 2013 till 2019. Professor Martin is an author and co-author of, if I'm not mistaken, 13 books, including the famous in every business school, Playing to Win, I believe, and his recent book, The New Way to Think, a Guide to Management Effectiveness, is of special interest, and I believe will be a subject of discussion today. Professor Martin, it is really a great honor and pleasure to see you, and thank you for finding the time to share with us and with our audience your deep and vast knowledge, and we are looking forward to hearing to your presentation and then discussion.
Well, thank you very much. It's my honor, not yours, to be able to do something to contribute to the brave fight that Ukraine is undertaking to support global democracy, right? So it's my honor, and I'm glad to be here, and hope that I can provide some thoughts of interest. So with no further ado, I will share my screen. There we go. Perfect. So the book referred to as A New Way to Think, which is my latest book that came out earlier in 2022. And the reason I wrote this book was to provide encouragement to business executives and business people in general to be tougher on the models that they use to guide their actions, to be more reflective about those models so that they can take ownership of those models. So what am I thinking about on this front? Well, if I use as a metaphor for this, the thermometer, right? The thermometer is a system, right? Where we set the thermometer at a certain temperature, let's say 20 degrees. And what happens is if the temperature gets down to 18 degrees, for example, the thermometer knows we should get it back to 20 degrees. If the temperature in the room goes up to 22 degrees, the job of the system is to get it back down to 20 degrees. And that's what would be called single loop learning, coined by Chris Argyris, which is that there's a learning loop between the set temperature and the existing temperature that gets it back to the set temperature. But a thermometer never asks the question, is that 20 degrees the right temperature to be setting the system to? Because all it can do is do the single loop learning that gets us back to 20 degrees. And what instead should that be optimally? What that is adjusting your model to make it a more useful model, rather than just using the model to guide yourself back to whatever that model produces. And everything we do in the world is based on a model. We model the world around us to be able to help us take action on it. And so this is just a made-up model. This is an equation. And there are two ways we can have a relationship with that model. One is that you own your model. In the situation where you own your model, if it doesn't work for you, you scrap it and choose a different model. Just like if 20 degrees doesn't work for you, you scrap that and change the model to, no, I like to have a colder house or apartment, and I'm going to set it to 16. Or I like it to be warmer, I'm going to set it to 22. That's you owning your model. If instead you don't change the model, even if it doesn't produce an outcome you like, even if you say, man, I'm always warm in this apartment, but you feel like you can't change the thermometer, you don't know how to change the setting, then essentially your model owns you, right? It runs your life. You have to put up with whatever outcomes it generates. In A New Way to Think, the book, what I did is explore 14 models of business that are the dominant model in business that I think are not productive and helpful for the companies using them. But despite that, they just keep being used and used and used. And so in each chapter, I talk about a model, why it doesn't work, and offer a different approach. And so I just thought in the time we have together, I would talk through 3 of the chapters in the book, the models that I used in the book. So the dominant model of the corporation, right, is a model of control, right? So you have, let's say, this corporation with 2 groups and 4 business units each. It could be any structure you want, but generally the view is that it is the job of the corporate head, right, to set the strategy for the company and then control and coordinate what the groups and business units do. Everything below that is how you run a company. You set strategy, then you make sure that people execute the strategy that you have set. You make sure they report in, you make sure that they're on budget, you control the organization. And that's basically taught in the business education system. Now, I talk about strategy and say strategy is a set of choices that you make. What's your winning aspiration? Where do you choose to play on that basis? How do you win where you've chosen to play? What are the capabilities you've got to have in the management system? That's my view of strategy. You can have any view of strategy, but the general view, right, is that strategy making happens at the top of the corporation, and everybody else is then aligned to it and is controlled on that basis. And so the arrow of authority, if you will, goes from the top of the organization kind of on down. Now, the challenge with this approach, right, is that the customers, right, are served by the folks lower down in the organization, by a business unit. So people tend to think, oh, the organization, if you just take a big global company like Coca-Cola, right, that's got many businesses. It's in the water business, the soft drink business, colas and non-colas, Frito-Lay, chips and the like. And customers don't say when they buy a Dasani water or they buy a Sprite, they don't say, I am buying, or Lay's potato chips. They aren't saying to themselves, I'm buying a Coca-Cola product. No, they're saying I'm buying a bottled water. And I like the Dasani brand better than other brands of bottled water. Most of them don't even know that it's purchased by Coke. And so the fact that there is a Coca-Cola at the top that is controlling and coordinating the bottled water business doesn't matter to the consumer and doesn't inherently help you win with the consumer. That is what I think of as the coal face, where at that coal face, the customer is thinking about the product that they're wanting to consume, or if they're a company wanting to have a cloud solution, they are deciding whether they want Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, or Azure. They aren't thinking Microsoft, Google, Amazon. So in a world in which the model of the company is we control the strategy and set the strategy and then control everything, the business units down below aren't helped. They're constrained. And what I would view as a better model of the corporation is not a model based on control, but it's a model based on assistance. It's based on the notion that actually at every level of the company, strategy is set. There's got to be a strategy for Dasani, just like there's got to be a strategy for Coca-Cola, just like there's got to be a strategy for Sprite, etc. All those customer-facing business units have to have a strategy, and the groups have to have a strategy. The beverage business of the Coca-Cola company has to have a strategy. The snack business, Frito-Lay, has to have a strategy. There is strategy throughout the company, and the role of every level above the coal face, where the customer is making a purchase decision, every layer above that to be in existence has to provide assistance to the level below. Right? So if the beverage business can help the bottled water business be more competitive with something that it does in its strategy, then it has a reason to exist. If the Frito-Lay, the snack business, salted snack business, can help the potato chip business or the pretzel business or the cookie business sell more effectively to customers, then it deserves to exist. So rather than thinking of the job of the corporation as controlling and coordinating, the job should be assisting those at the rock face at the coal face, I should say, to be able to do their job more successfully. And in fact, the best model of a corporation is to think that this is a two-way street, right? That the competition takes place at the coal face, at the bottom of the company, and all levels above have to help that coal face be more productive, be better equipped to serve those customers. But also, right, it flows the other way as well, which is that the corporation should be able to build capabilities that work across businesses and choose what businesses make sense to be in the portfolio versus not. And if the company can't help a business at the coal face compete to a greater extent, then it should get rid of that business, find it a better home, sell it to somebody who can do that. Procter Gamble, for example, has over the last 15 years figured out that it is not the best home for food products. And all of its food businesses, including Pringles, for those of you who are fans of Pringles, it is no longer a Procter product, all of its food businesses were sold to food companies because that provides a better home, while it's taken the proceeds from that and bulked up in areas like beauty, hair care, etc., and cleaning and laundry and cleaning products, where it can help the parts below it. So the job of the corporation, in addition to assisting, it's to make sure that it invests in the places where it can provide assistance and gets out of the places where it can't provide the assistance. So it's a different model. It's flipping the model to a model of assistance from control, even though the dominant model is a model of control. And I was just being interviewed actually last week by an ex-US Navy SEAL, and was saying that this is the philosophy of the SEALs. The person at the top's job is to help the people who are actually going out on the mission have the best chance of succeeding. It's not to control them, to tell them what to do, because they realize that when they're out in the field, they're going to have to make those decisions on their own. And the question is, what can they do to help? So I was interested in the elite military kind of world. There's less a conception of control, even though people think of armed forces as more command and control. That's not as much the case as it's thought. So that's one model. Let me move on to another model. And this is the dominant model for making decisions. The dominant model for making decisions in the modern world of business is rigorous data analytics. If you're going to make a decision, you're going to go out and get the data and do the regression and make your decision on that basis. But what's happened in the world of business is there's a paradox, which is there's a real executive frustration with the level and pace of innovation in every big company that I've kind of consulted to, been involved in. But at the same time, it's a golden age for disruptive startups. So the CEOs of companies these days, more than anything else, are asking themselves the question, what two kids in a garage are going to build a disruptive fintech or medtech or edtech company that is going to displace us and destroy us? So the question is, how can you have these two things going on in the world at the same time? All sorts of disruptive innovation, but the existing companies feeling that they can't innovate. Well, I believe it has to do with this, the dominant model for how decisions are now made, especially in large companies. And there's this challenge, this fundamental challenge with data that you have to think about. So if you think about data and time and ask the question, as at the time of you doing analysis in order to make a decision. Let's call that time t equals 0, right? If you ask, where does data come from, right? In what era does all data come from? The answer is the past. As of the time you're analyzing, 100% of the data you have is from the past, right? So when we say we're going to use data analytics to make our decisions, we have to recognize that 100% of that data is from the past, right? So if we're making a decision about the future, right, and we're using data entirely from the past because that's the only data that we have 0% of data from the future, what is the implicit assumption that we are making? And I would argue this is the implicit assumption, right? That the future is the same as the past. Now, when you see that, it's hard for you to say anything but, well, that's crazy. Most of the business kind of world keeps on changing and modifies. And we know that from the crises, the COVID, everything changed with COVID. The future was different than the past. Things have changed again for the world due to the Soviet aggression, Russian aggression in Ukraine. So the future has this kind of nasty habit of being different than the past, yet we make decisions based on data analytics of the past, and that's happening to a greater and greater extent. I think that's what is causing this dissatisfaction with innovation, is because you cannot create the future by analyzing the past. Right? As the great American pragmatist philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce said, no new idea in the history of the world has been proven in advance analytically, right? That's because you cannot prove something different than the past by using data from the past. What does that mean for our model then of saying the only good decisions are ones that are based on scientific analysis of data? Is that there's a better model for making decisions. And that better model says there are two distinctive parts of the world and they require fundamentally different decision approaches. Now, this is not a kind of a new to the world idea. It's actually was put forward by the world's greatest scientist, and that's Aristotle. And Aristotle, who was the first, why I call him the world's greatest scientist, he essentially invented science. His was the exploration of how to determine the cause of the effects we see. That's what Aristotle worked on, and the book, or that a compilation of things he wrote called Analytica Posteriora, is the foundational text of science. And everybody who takes a course in science knows that that's the history and from where it came. But what they aren't taught, and that's why there's a dominant model, is that Aristotle warned against using his methodology everywhere. So he said that his methodology, science, is for the part of the world where things cannot be other than they are. So what did he mean by that? That if I have this pen in my hand and I let go of it, what'll happen? It'll drop. It'll drop here where I am in Florida. It'll drop in Ukraine. It'll drop in Antarctica. It'll drop everywhere in the world. And it dropped last week, and it's going to drop next week, and the week after, and the week after that, right? And that's because it's part of the world where things cannot be other than they are. There's a universal force called gravity that pushes everything down. Right? And he said, in that part of the world, use my scientific method. Again, why does that make sense? Because in that part of the world, the future is going to be the same as the past. So analyzing past data to predict the future is a very, very good thing to do. It's a clever thing to do, right? But the father of science warned, and this isn't taught anywhere, virtually anywhere in the world, which is that there's another part of the world, which I often use this to illustrate, right? How many of these things were there? Smartphones were there in 1999? The answer is 0. The first smartphone was BlackBerry, launched in 2000. And last time I checked the numbers, there are now 4.4 billion of them. Our entire life has changed. We generally get kind of chills or get fearful when that phone is more than an arm's length away. It's changed everything about the way we live and work. And what Aristotle said in that part of the world is very clear. He said, do not use my scientific method. It's crystal clear on it. Not be careful, use it a little bit differently. He said, don't use it. And he said, in that part of the world, rigorous thinking and rigorous deciding is based on imagination. And the task is to do these two things: imagine possibilities and choose the one for which the most compelling argument can be made. So Aristotle was very much into the idea that when you're in that part of the world and you're trying to create the future, there should be discussion of an argumentation for one path or another path. And the path for whom the argument is most compelling, for which the argument is most compelling, is the path that you should choose. Not because the data told you so, but because that's the only way you can operate in the part of the world where things cannot be other than where things can be other than they are. Interestingly enough, the world has forgot completely about what Aristotle has said, and instead made the scientific method all about the later stages in it. So the scientific method in its most simple form is you construct a hypothesis, you design and conduct an experiment, you analyze the data and draw a conclusion. And there are literally thousands of PhD courses in the world on tens of thousands of PhD courses in the world on those three things: how to design experiments, how to conduct experiments, the various methods for analyzing data to be rigorous about it, and how you can take that data analytics and draw conclusions. There are literally thousands of courses on that. But I've looked and looked, and I've pretty much given up now because there aren't any. There's not a single PhD course in the world that I've found that teaches you how to construct a hypothesis, how to construct a novel hypothesis. You're told that you need to. And in fact, if you're an academic, your entire academic career depends entirely on doing that. But there are no courses on it. It's sort of literally the immaculate conception theory that somehow it comes into existence. And that is why we are, I think, in a dangerous point in the world of business in our over-reliance on analyzing stuff rather than imagining possibilities. That's a hypothesis, a possibility about the future, and being able to make decisions that aren't based on analysis of data. And I think, for what it's worth, the key to innovation is anomalies, right? We are drawn in the modern world of business towards the regression line, the mean, the median, the mode. That's where our eyes are drawn, and they're drawn away from the anomalies, which are viewed as anomalies, things that don't make sense. But it is by looking at anomalies, in my view, that cause you to think about what might be a different way of understanding the world. And so rather than think about always making decisions based on analysis, you've got to ask yourself the question, whenever you're analyzing anything in the world of business, ask yourself the question, am I prepared to assume that the future will be identical to the past? Well, then analyze and make your decision based on analysis. But if you instead say, well, no, consumers change, regulations change, competition changes, so this things are going to change, then do as Aristotle said and do not use analysis. and instead use your imagination. Those are 2 of the 12 chapters, but in the interest of time, I'm going to stop there, and I am happy to take any or all questions about the new way to think. Thank you very much.
You promised to address 3 models, but as far as I could gather, only
2. I just did 2.
Or the third one was the one on the third slide. You know, this complicated formula which appeared, and everybody probably was stressed when seeing this formula, and immediately reminded me the advice of my colleague, passed away, by the way, that every professor should have 1 formula on the blackboard, otherwise he will be in trouble.
I see. Okay, well, so I've done that. Excellent. Questions?
We have the very first question which appeared, and let's start with this just to continue and probably to encourage you a little bit going deeper into this. It was not just a question, but the credit. And anomalies welcome, the question mark, which means that when we have in our data anomalies, which means that we should immediately jump into them and start to analyze it. Is it your advice?
It would be yes, it would be to pay attention to them. And I think the exercise I do when I see an anomaly is I ask the question, what would have to be true for that to be on the regression line? Right. So it's away from the regression line of the model that we think is in existence now. Right. We have some independent variable, and we measure the dependent variable, and they all cluster around there. I'd ask the question, you know, what model of the world would I have to have for that anomaly to actually be on the regression line? And by imagining that world, I can then try to produce it, right? So, you know, Johnny Ive, the famous Apple designer, when he was kind of thinking about what would be the next interesting thing to do with the Mac, looked at an anomaly, right, which was all cameras in the world at that point were either black, dark gray, dark brown, right? Except there was this one camera, the Savoy camera, that had come out 20 years earlier. There was all sorts of bright colors, and in fact, it came in a range of colors, and it sold very well, but it was an anomaly, right? And it came and sort of went, and nobody really picked up on it. And so Johnny Ives asked the question, could something similar happen in the PC business? What if we made, rather than gray computers 100%, we make colorful computers that have a statement color, right? And that was the origin of the iMac, right? Which used, interesting enough, exactly the same Pantones, the exact same colors as the Savoy cameras had 25 years before then. So that was him looking at an anomaly and saying, what does that anomaly teach me? And that's what I would do. So I think you learned lots from customers, right, who say, I just hate the way you're configuring the product now, or it's really not serving my needs. I have these other needs. You asked yourself the question, well, what would have to be true for that to be in the middle of things, right? So again, Steve Jobs, what is true about all smartphones before this smartphone came out, right, is that they had little keyboards that you typed on with your thumbs, right? Nobody typed on glass, right? But he said, how could I cause people to type on glass? And sure enough, right, he taught them to do that. not by looking at the mainstream, but by thinking about other places where people would type on a touch screen, not necessarily a smartphone, but others. So that's what I think the value of anomalies is. It gives you ideas about what might be. Usually you have to work hard to make that happen, but it'll give you a clue to that.
Great. If you wouldn't mind, we shall come back to this, data analysis, imagination, which is more difficult compared, in my opinion, compared to your first clear, let's say, downgrade in the control, which I personally support very much indeed. But to be more practical, you work with big organizations, and you can understand, you were dean of the business school, you understand that since Henry Fayol, whatever it is in management, what managers do, control is one of the functions, etc., etc., etc. It's very, very deep. And also when organization grows, it started to grow with a small part when everybody, simultaneously in control and assist each other, and then grew up, becoming this some kind of a strong hierarchy, and it created, it come back with the people, this feeling of control. Everything should be under control. How big organizations which exist long enough could struggle or could transform themselves into the more assistance-like approach than control?
Well, I think it has to come from the very top, from the CEO, and I think the CEO of any big company needs to be in touch with the people at the coal face, right? And understand what could make them more effective, what the company could do to help to make them more effective than not. And it's not unlike doing customer research, right? In some sense, the customer of the CEO is the customer, outside customer facing units. And so I would advise them to just go and talk to them and say, what things does this corporation do that makes your life harder? Oh, well, we have to have quarterly business reviews, and that takes, a week each quarter for us to prep for the quarterly business reviews. And that doesn't help our customers one iota. In fact, it takes us away from thinking about our customers. And you could ask, and if you were the CEO asking that question, you could say, well, kind of how could we streamline that so that we can keep track and help coordinate across all the businesses, but it not take that much of your time. And you could just work through that and saying, could we cut that down to a meeting that takes you a day to prepare for? Or could we do it twice a year rather than once a quarter? So it would be to treat them like customers and work and have a philosophy of helping to make their lives better. That's your fundamental philosophy. Our job is to make their lives better. That would be how I would go about doing it. And I think there are many things that corporations can do to stop that. I mean, it was interesting. I before the great Procter CEO A.G. Lafley left Procter for a second time, he was CEO in the 2000s, 2000 to 2009, and really turned it around and is considered a transformational CEO. He then appointed the wrong guy who did a bad job for 4 years, so that AG had to come back. The board had him come back. And before he left a second time, he said, I'm going to teach everybody strategy because I realized I didn't leave enough of a strategy legacy. And so he and I taught a program to teach the top 26 people at Procter & Gamble strategy. And during that program, he asked the question of those people, well, what do we do at the corporate level, that because these were all heads of all the business units, what do we do that makes your life kind of miserable? And the answer was the extensive preparation we have to do for doing strategy with the company. And they say we have about 150-page document with specified kind of pages. You got to have a chart on this, a chart on this, a chart on this, and chart on this. Now AG was surprised. He said, "Wow, I'm surprised because I don't ever even look at those things, and I didn't even know you had to produce a bunch of those things." And as a result, he got a team of 3 of them to volunteer to cut it down by 80%. He said, "I would like to cut the workload that you do on strategy by 80%." And sure enough, they came back with it, and he said, "Yep, we're going to do that." Well, that would be to me an example of saying, what can we do to be helpful rather than what can we do to make us feel like we're more in control than otherwise.
Great example, by the way, that strategy preparation makes the life miserable of managers who are responsible for strategy development. That's a great example. Thank you. I'd like to come to. Well, first, I want to mention this to everybody who at the moment is listening to us and later that, if I may, one of the example, strategy, business strategy in business comes the world from military, and currently we are in the war where, in my opinion, could be just exactly this 2 model seen. We have a very controlled, oriented, very hierarchical approach to somehow to control and rule and manage, let's call it manage, the Russian army. And absolutely different approach in Ukrainian army. And we see on the battlefield which models actually are more effective and I'm sure more efficient in this respect. And I encourage everybody in their own businesses also to pay more attention to assistance rather than to control.
No, I agree, and it's in some sense even sort of worse outcomes than you'd imagine, because then the systems can adjust. So if you know that the enemy is super hierarchical, and in order to do something, they've got to send back up the chain of command to get a decision, and then it comes back down. What you can do is do things that you otherwise wouldn't, right? Which is to attack them in ways that they can't counterattack, right? Because it'll take them 5 days to get the answer to the question of what they're supposed to do. So it becomes progressively worse when the assistance-based organization starts to essentially exploit to a greater extent the hierarchical organization, because they know it's hierarchical, and I see that in the world of business for sure, where more kind of agile companies say, we're going to do these things because we know that top-down control-oriented company kind of won't be able to respond for weeks, months, etc. So I think the military analogy here is a good one, and I think hopefully you're teaching the Russians a lesson they'll never forget.
No, we'd like to. Okay, then switch to more complicated, more complex comparison you used, and I'd like to not to challenge, but to provide the example when we do, due to scientific knowledge and due to science, know about the future a lot. And at the moment, this word affects very much businesses as well. I speak about this climate changes, models which are quite reliable already on what will happen more or less in general terms about in the future about with the climate, and they all should address these issues. Right now, these days, we have an annual conference in Egypt. We have the address from the United Nations chairman that we are going into the catastrophic events, etc. So there's a lot of reliable scientific models about where are we going.
Yeah.
And at the same time, business are using various kind of imaginations to avoid this. I'm of course exaggerating, but
Yeah.
in Florida, for example, your governor, etc., is a famous warrior with ESG approach and subject. Could you comment a little bit? We do sometimes know a lot. Or another example, which you use about the virus and COVID, etc. Actually, it could be predicted that a pandemic could happen and could affect business very much, because during the 20th century, 3 times there were a global events like this. But businesses, nevertheless, like other people, they don't want to pay money and to pay cost to insure themselves from these issues. This resilience became famous, and usage of the word of this word increased 10 times over the last 5 years, as far as I could gather. But we are going now to be resilient. Because in the past it was necessary. So we are again getting the same trap. So this is a trap.
Yeah.
Even though,
No. Yeah.
why, in your opinion, businesses couldn't just use those data and try to neglect them or whatever? I don't know.
Sure. Well, a couple things. One is, I mean, I want to be kind of very clear. What Aristotle says, and I am repeating, is not don't use science. It's use science in one circumstance, but not in the other. And the circumstance is where the future is identical to the past. And I think that's simply a question you've got to ask every time you see an analysis. Right? Anytime somebody presents you with an analysis, they present you, oh, okay. You have to ask yourself the question, is what this analysis is about regarding a part of the world where things cannot be other than they are, right? And if you can say that with some confidence, then follow the analysis, right? But if you can't say that with confidence, then don't. And I would say that the climate change kind of analysis is having to do with elemental things that don't change, can't change, and so you can make more predictions about the future using data from the past. In terms of pandemics, I think virtually all the analysis that would have been done on aspects of resilience did assume a future that was identical to the relatively recent past, right? So all the hospitals that laid off nurses to get more efficient, who didn't have personal protective equipment in stock because that was expensive inventory to carry, were regressing the last 20 years or 40 years, and it made lots of sense. But they didn't think, there was no thought to the fact that something as disruptive as COVID could come along. I mean, we had SARS, and that wasn't nearly as disruptive. We had MERS, which wasn't nearly as disruptive, and the Spanish flu, kind of 100 years earlier, that was disruptive. We had the bubonic plague, but most of that data, you'd have to go back to the Spanish flu to say there was something that was in any respect as disruptive as COVID. And I think most people analyzing that would say, well, that was then. Our kind of medicine and kind of systems for kind of warning us that some pandemic-like thing. And SARS, we figured out how to contain it really quickly. So I think the regression of the past would have been to say, if we're going to have something in the future, it'll be like SARS, and we will figure out how to very quickly contain it, and it'll be bye-bye within, a few months at worst. And that was an error, a significant error.
Another question, but in this respect, about when really it is not possible, or it is very difficult, let's say, to say anything about the future, and we have it in current time, let's say in Ukraine, when there are major crises going on the war and troubles, and a lot of uncertainties, and expected uncertainties, unexpected uncertainties around. Are there any particular, let's say, kind of thinking or tools or models that may be used by companies in such times? It's very popular, the strategy in the time of crisis, or whatever. What's your opinion about this? Are such tools, models exist at all? And if yes, what would you recommend?
I just recommend diversity, right? So I think if you, so let's say you're Ukrainian business right now, and you're trying to figure out kind of how to prepare yourself for the future. I would just make sure you have a variety of models, right? What if the war ends right away and Russia backs off, etc.? What if it's protracted? It's sort of scenarios. I think the scenario planning has gotten to be a little bit too formalized for my and sort of technocratic for my liking. But it's to say this could be another outcome, this could be another outcome, and play those out so that you have a different response depending on what emerges, and then ask yourself the question: to what extent do we have the ability to keep open three possible futures, and be prepared for those? Or do we have to make a bet now? And my view is, when you have to make a bet now, you have to do it the way Aristotle said, which is you lay out the various possibilities and make arguments for each, and whichever for the decision-making team feels most compelling, choose that. But I wouldn't choose if things are very uncertain, and you could place short-term investments in against the three possibilities, and buy some time to figure out which it's going to end up being.
Okay, you mentioned that you didn't find any course in hypothesis development, or let's say, are there any courses in business schools about the imagination development, and what kind of approach the companies could take in order to encourage and promote this thinking of future in different terms, and then using imagination for this purpose?
Yeah, well, so there's very few courses in business schools that are about anything other than data analytics, right? And so I'm relatively discouraged about business education on this front, and it's very, very hard to change it. I tried very hard for 15 years to change that at the Rotman School. I started a design thinking kind of initiative there. We had coursework and the like on it, and as soon as I left, almost all of it was demolished. And it's just because the business school world doesn't like imagination. It likes analysis, and fortunately, students care about imagination, and employers care about imagination. And so, despite professors not, there are all sorts of clubs being created, and co-curricular, extracurricular activities in business schools. So what I'd tell any student is if your business school doesn't have a design club, a design thinking club, start one. bring in speakers. There are lots of the kind of design thinking kind of competitions that go on in the business school world, and you're going to have to work harder as a student to seek that out. The other thing I would consider is go to a design school rather than a business school, honestly. Right? If you want to learn how to manage what is, go to business school. If you want to design what might be, go to a design school.
Well, so you encourage our audience not to go to business school at the moment. That's good. But
it depends what they want. It depends what they want.
Exactly. No, it's a good, to let's say widen the look at the world is very important for leaders. I also support it very much, and there are different approaches how to widen this. It's good if you let's say humanitarian and try to also to understand how data analyst thinks and vice versa also could help in both directions. I love to know your opinion about this favorite subject on the abbreviations of AI, and I love it because artificial intelligence, in let's say, as far as the model is concerned, is just all about the past and all about statistics of the human being in the past. If I may use this your definitions, or your, say, briefly construct the model, and then we have artificial intelligence which would guide us and would help us in the future. So something is wrong fundamentally, and then what's your opinion about this? Then
I think it's the next kind of management trend that will be taken to too great an extreme and then kind of blow up. People are not paying attention to Aristotle when they are in the ways that they're using artificial intelligence, but because it's cool, everybody's doing it. It's like re-engineering. 30 years ago, everybody was going to re-engineer everything, and then somebody did the study of 100 re-engineering projects, then found that 92 of the 100 were complete failures, and then we don't hear much about re-engineering anymore. I think AI is going to go up and crescendo, blow up spectacularly like a supernova, and then we're going to get to some sensible thing where it gets put in a box and used in situations where the future is sufficiently identical to the past that we can use AI for that. But I think it's just going to have massive overuse. I mean, it's like market research, right? Quantitative, large sample market research. I think we're past peak market research, and now there's much more ethnography where you're going and living with customers to figure out in a more nuanced way what they like, rather than they check a box that says, this is important, this is not important, and we add those 100,000 responses up and say, this is what consumers think. We're past that era.
That's, in my opinion, a very optimistic opinion.
Yes.
The view. Why it's optimistic? Because it creates the interesting future. Otherwise, if I personally would start when think about the future in terms of artificial intelligence, it's becoming quite how to call it, not very interesting at all. Not to mention certain classics and classical books. What's this last very short questions?
Sure.
Not the questions will be short. You may use the time to answer it a little bit longer. What helps you to imaginate and to be somehow to have the wider view, to be simultaneously providing the critical thinking and new ideas? What actually if you know, because it's not
Yeah, no, I mean,
not always clear.
no, it's a good question. I guess I think, I mean, I guess the easiest, most straightforward answer is that I'm a curious person. But I guess what I tend to be more of an explicit rather than implicit modeler. So when anybody says something to me, gives an opinion to me, I tend to very quickly go to asking myself, what's the model in their head that causes them to think X? You know, they've said X to me, and I say, what causes them to think that? And I take note of that and say, okay, fair enough. There must be some sense to that, otherwise, because a sensible person wouldn't have thought that. But what would be another model that I could apply in this situation that might get me to a different answer? And so I just sort of naturally do that. I almost sort of take anybody's existing model and put it on trial, as opposed to just accept it for what it is. And that gives me ideas of how to do things differently. I try to make sure that anything I'm doing fits with human nature. So I'll give you an example. Rotman School, I become dean. I've never been in a business school before, and they decide they need to tell me about fundraising, right? Because that's the job of one job of a dean, is to raise money for the school, especially in North America, maybe less in Europe, but North America, that's a big thing. And they sort of say, well, here's how it's done. You kind of make lists of people who have lots of money, and then you go and ask them for money. And so you need to have a lot of development people whose job it is to go and ask rich people for money. And I sort of said to myself, gee, I know a lot of rich people. And some of them are kind of dummies who were born rich. But the vast majority of them are actually quite smart. They didn't get their money by accident. They got it, by having good ideas and working hard. And so let me put myself in their shoes and say, how would they feel about somebody who they don't know from Adam, who they know their job is fundraising, is going to come to my office and ask me for money? How do I feel about that? The answer is like, this is a real annoyance. This is not compelling, right? That's what a real person would in that situation would be, not a somebody who's sort of a theoretical person who's just keen to start giving their money away. So I said, we're not going to do that. We're just not. And all the people, oh my God, this dean's not interested in fundraising. They're not going to raise any money. I ended up raising more money as dean of the business school than all the other business schools in Canada combined during my time as dean. How did I do it? I said, these rich people with money, they're interested in things. And if the things they're interested in coincide with things we're interested in, we should get them involved in what we're doing. Invite them to conferences that we're doing on things that are of interest to them. Get them to teach courses in things that they're interested in. And then if they see us as being worthy, they'll give us money. That was a completely different model, untested, right? Viewed as incredibly dangerous and stupid by the development people, but was more successful than any other thing in Canada at the time. But what was it based on? It was based on understanding human beings and not creating theoretical, hypothetical automatons and assuming that we could make the automatons do what we wanted. So that's that gives me ideas of how to do things differently, to take the real human perspective.
Thank you. If I may, if you would allow, I would then underline the words curiosity, be curious, and
Yes.
put on often the shoes of your customer, and this will help to imagine.
Yes.
And also to help to run businesses. With this, and there is a certain pity of time ending very, very, very quick. I appreciate and thank you very much again, Professor Martin, for your time and for sharing with us your thoughts and ideas of the book. Obviously, everybody should. I'm not sure whether it's already translated in Ukrainian, but will be translated for certain. And the book will be on the shelves on students in business school. Of those who would anyway would choose to study in business school rather than in design bureaus and other possibilities. But again, thank you very much. And we are looking forward for the time when Ukraine will be safe enough for you to travel here, and you will always find your followers and those people who admire reading your books and listening to you.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you again. It's my honor. And all I can say is that I think there are so many of us around the world who are praying and hoping for Ukraine on this front. So my heart is with you, and I would love to come and visit in person after you get rid of those nasty Russians.
We shall overcome. And for all our participants, I'd like to remind that our project is on full pace. We do not stop despite of all the blackouts or whatever. We'll continue on next Wednesday, November 16th and 6 p.m. And we shall keep speaking about strategy and the future. This time we will not have a business school professor, but we have it's not a very popular word at the moment, some kind of a futurist, Jerry Michalski, who would address the issues how to work in the economy when relations, again, about people and trust is important. And I believe it's very interesting, and please keep your calendars open for this time, and we'll meet you and looking forward to meet you next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Again, Professor Martin, it's a great pleasure. Have a nice day. And end of these troubles with elections in the USA, and more stable time, because instability is not very helpful for the future. It's better to use data and control to make business easier, not better, easier.
Easier. That's right. Easier, not better.
Easier.
All righty. Well, thank you so much for having me, and best of luck. Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
The war in Ukraine has changed the world, and now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project Reinforce UA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on reinforceua.com.